I see two questions in here. Is it true that no respectable biologist has ever used the theory of recapitulation? And to whom do you go for your source of research on embryology?
Okay, I go to my embryology classes and I go to my readings of embryology when I talk about embryological origins. And I see that I've confused people by using the pharyngeal gill slits as my example. I did not mean to imply that I adhere to this old ancient theory of ontogeny recapitulating phylogeny. Stephen Jay Gould wrote a book about this subject in which he very thoroughly took care of any vestigial doubts about ontogeny recapitulating phylogeny. So my source for, what was the other part of the question? Sorry, Ed.
Is it true that no respectable biologist has ever used the theory of recapitulation?
Well, it was respectable for a time until it was disproven. So I wouldn't slander historical biologists for using a theory that they didn't know any better about.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hovind.
Yes, Dr. Richardson in her opening comments was giving the sciences that support evolution, and she said developmental biology supports evolution because of vestigial organs, including gill slits and tails while the baby is in the mother's womb. So she is using ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. We've got it on tape. It is still in the textbooks, that's for certain. I have nearly all the textbooks, and it is in there. They are still teaching in many of the textbooks ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. They will list evidences for evolution, and they will talk about embryonic development proving evolution. Similarities in a microscopic stage, of course, when the animal is smaller, it's tougher to see the differences, but it still doesn't prove they have a common ancestor. Similarities could easily prove a common creator. The idea that there are similarities in development and similarities in the adult stages, two bones in the wrist, does not prove a common ancestor. It proves a common creator. Both can argue that as their point, and it's a moot point. It's not part of the argument. Similarities have nothing to do with evolution or creation. Both are going to take that for evidence for their side.
Thank you. I'm not sure if we've completely covered this or not, but I'm going to come back to it. If you believe in creation, why go to the doctor? Either you believe or you don't. The laws of physics are always constant. Does this relate to, does faith in creationism relate to practice of medicine?
I would guess that question is for me. I definitely believe in creation, and I certainly go to the doctor. I think the human body is extremely complex, and any complex mechanism can go bad. I worked at General Motors. I helped build trucks. I believe that General Motors builds trucks, but I'm certainly not against mechanics. They do break down. The belief in creation does not mean you can't. I don't understand any relation at all between belief in creation and not going to the doctor. I cannot see the logic in that. I'm sorry. Yes, I believe you ought to go to the doctor if you get sick. I have no problem with that.
I go to the doctor.
Okay, you're next, or you're first up next then. Dr. Richardson, how does evolution explain development of the sexes and variety of species from one cell?
Development of the sexes. So they want to know about the origin of genders in reproduction.
How does evolution explain development of the sexes and variety of species from one cell?
Okay. Let's see, the theory of evolution takes us from simple cells to multiple cells, all of which undergo asexual reproduction. And when we get to the multi-celled organisms, we see the origins of, some of the single-celled organisms that are further derived do exchange gametic information, which we would consider the role of sexual reproduction. So evolution deals with the evolution of sex by saying that sexual reproduction increases the chances of variation in your genotype. Okay, every time you produce gametes that are half of your genome, and when these combine, genetic recombination is possible, allowing further variation in your genome. And variation is the stuff of evolution. So sexual reproduction is a key to allowing variation, which allows evolution by natural selection. Is that pretty much?
I would say that was definitely begging the question. That explains that once it works, it's useful and it works good, but it doesn't explain how it got to be that way at all. How do you go from asexual to sexual reproduction? There is no good answer to that by evolution. Sexual reproduction is, of course, a very inefficient way to produce offspring. The chances of how many things would have to be right in order for sexual reproduction to work? It'd be like your automobile. I could say, how many things have to be right for it to work? You would say, well, thousands. How many things have to be wrong for it not to work? Any one of thousands of things. And sexual reproduction is so complex, it could not have arisen piece by piece by chance. It had to be designed and created. And there is no good evolutionary explanation. All the different single-celled animals have both types, asexual and sexual reproduction. And the idea that to say that it's here, therefore it must have evolved, is certainly begging the question. Yes, I agree it's here, but that to me says it must have been created. So again, both are going to use that evidence. I think the creation, though it does involve an unseen creator, definitely takes a lot of faith. And evolution would take even more faith to say, well, it works, so it had to get here somehow.
Then I guess my next question for you, to begin with, why isn't the ocean floor as old as predicted? The formula distance equals rate times time says so. Why isn't the ocean floor as old as predicted? The formula distance equals rate times time says so. You can pass on these if you wish.
Yeah, I don't think that question is put together the way the person was intending it to be. The sediments in the ocean definitely indicate a young age for the ocean. There's not enough sediment down there to indicate millions of years of accumulation. That's why the continental drift theory is so important to the evolutionary theory, because they have to develop some way of getting rid of ocean sediments because it simply is not there. I live by the San Andreas Fault. I'm very familiar with the continental cracks in the place, and the earth is shifting and twisting, but again, that does not prove it's been going on for millions of years. And similarities of shapes, Africa and South America would fit together. That does not prove they broke apart millions of years ago. I could say this building and the building across the street are oriented the same. That does not prove they broke apart and the blacktop oozed up between them. Similarity of shape is determined by the water level. If you raise the ocean 500 feet, Chicago becomes on the beach, and the whole Amazon jungle would be flooded, and that similarity of shape would disappear. So the ocean sediments are a real problem for the evolutionist. As far as the continents spreading, it may be that the Atlantic is getting wider. The only research that I'm familiar with that was done on that was the satellite where they bounced lasers from Europe and America for 8 years till the satellite finally fell out of parking orbit. They did not actually see any movement of the continents, so they attributed the maximum allowable error to atmospheric twinkle, 0.46 arc seconds, as the laser goes through the atmosphere, and said, well, they must have moved and we couldn't detect it. So there may be movement, I'm not saying there's not, but the idea of continental drift and ocean floors is very important to evolution because it gets rid of an embarrassing problem, because there is not enough ocean sediments. As a creationist, I have no problem with that. The oceans are not billions of years old. That's why the sediment's not very thick.
Thank you. Dr. Richardson?
Well, I can account for an absence of sediments in the ocean by the theory of continental drift.
Which is?
Which is that the continents float on tectonic plates, and that the continent of North America is drifting closer to the continent of Asia, the Atlantic Ocean is spreading. We see seafloor spreading in the Atlantic Ocean. Seafloor spreading is accompanied by volcanic activity, things we can just go down and look at. It's not real elaborate bouncing satellites or anything. We just measure distances. And we see seafloor spreading in the Atlantic Ocean. The Pacific Ocean is considered much more ancient. It's the ocean that surrounded Pangaea 200 million years ago when the continents formed the supercontinent. And the Pacific Ocean is shrinking as we drift closer to Asia. This used to be scary before we made up with Russia and thought that we were drifting towards Russia. Every year was scary to some people, but now we don't have a problem with that.
Okay. The next one for you then, I believe you're here.
So I think environmentalism is valuable. I think it goes overboard, and I think many evolutionists are involved in environmentalism as kind of a salve on the conscience for the fact that they don't have the right God to worship.
Again, we have 3 or 4 that are similar, so I'm going to try to question them. And I believe this is directed only at Dr. Hovind because it has to do with the handout that he gave out at the beginning. How are the theories of humanism, racism, pornography, and women's lib, etc., connected to evolution as is suggested in the handout given at the door? Question number 6.
All right, let me get to that one. The idea that there is no supreme being, that man is the God of this universe, that we make our own decisions based on what we feel is right and wrong as a human species, the idea that there is no supreme being to be accounted to, has given rise to numbers of offshoot religions. Hitler certainly used evolution to justify his genocide and racism. I have Hitler's list. He had the Jews at the bottom as more ape-like. They hadn't evolved as far. The blacks were next. Hitler hated the blacks. He walked out of the Olympics in 1936 when Jesse Owens won the Olympics, a black man. Racism can certainly be traced to the philosophy that different races of people are superior to other races. Whereas in Christianity, in the Bible, it teaches all nations are of one blood. Acts chapter 17 teaches that very plainly, certainly against racism. Let's see, what you wanted? Communism. Karl Marx, of course, after Darwin's book came out, just rejoiced and said, this is perfect to justify my theories of communism. Karl Marx tried to dedicate his book, Das Kapital, to Charles Darwin. Marx knew full well the importance of evolution on communism, and without evolution, communism would collapse. They have to have evolution to support their theory, their economic theories and political theories of communism. As far as how it ties in with abortion, the ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Back to the same question. Is the baby human at the moment of conception? It has 46 chromosomes. It is going to develop into a human without intervention. Would we be upset if a woman killed her baby 6 weeks after it was born? After all, it's her life, it's her body. Doesn't she have choice anymore if it's going to interfere with her lifestyle? Somebody's not thinking on this argument. As far as socialism, the idea that it's man's duty to take from the rich and give to the poor, the Robin Hood philosophy, everybody should work together and we should make people contribute to those who do not work or will not work or cannot work. Socialism ties right in with many of the philosophers of the 1800s who were avid evolutionists, including many in the United States. Which other ones did they ask about on there? Women's lib?
The blah, 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 blah. We talk about, oh dear, where is it here?
Well, that's okay.
Well, I'll read you a similar one also then that had to do with question number 6. I'm sorry, I can't really find it.
Well, that's okay.
It had to do with there was a similar question that I cannot find right now that had something to do with why is it that well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to try to paraphrase something I can't read.
Okay.
Let me find it.
That's fine. On the women's lib issue, I would say what I'm referring to there is the type of extreme feminazis that Rush Limbaugh talks about. I certainly do not believe that man has the right to carry a club and drag his wife around by the hair, and that is certainly not taught in Scripture. The wife is my wife of nearly 20 years now, is my friend and my companion. We have a wonderful relationship. There is a difference in roles. If I was to ask which is better, a horse or a cow,